Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a very special guest today who's going to talk to us about all things surveillance-wise, but specifically, we're going to talk about the Russian hacking of our 2016 presidential election. Our guest is Bill Binney. He's a former highly placed intelligence official with the NSA turned whistleblower who resigned on October 31st, 2001, he was a high-profile critic of his former employers during the George W. Bush administration, and later he criticized the NSA's data collection policies during the Barack Obama administration. He also claims the U.S. intelligence community's assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election was false. Please welcome William Binney. Hi, Binney. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Dennis.
So now, I saw a documentary about you before any of this was made, before the Russia stuff started, and it was all about how you invented metadata analysis. Now, can you just take a moment and tell people what that is and how did you figure it out?
Actually, it goes back to the analog days when I was working the Soviet Union. I mean, the whole idea was pretty simple. I mean, if you can imagine having a large amount of data to analyze, and the question is, how can you package that in such a way that you can see what it really means without having to go through all of it because there's just too much to get through. So what it boiled down to was very simply, instead of reading or listening to what people were saying or doing, you look at the relationships between individuals. It's like social networking today. That's what they call social networking. It's looking at the metadata, which is your phone numbers or your email addresses or bank account numbers, where you see transactions between bank accounts or phone calls between phones or emails back and forth between people. That sets how you can basically, through a process called chaining, A talks to B, A talks to C, A talks to D, D talks to A, D talks to C, and so on. It's how you build a social network. And if you use that as a basic principle, then you can divide the communications of the entire world down into social networks. And then if you know which social networks are important or which ones are the ones that are committing crimes or planning military actions or things like that, then you can focus on them and actually do a proper job doing an analysis of the relevant data, not not the entire data of the world. It also allows you to use that. That gives you the ability then to filter out only that which is relevant. If you look at only, say, 1 degree away from everything that's known to be bad, then you only pull data that's in a highly relevant area in the world. And so you reduce the problem down to 0.0001% of the data in the world. You immediately give everybody privacy at the same time.
So what you figured out was that you could actually have a greater ability to predict what was going to happen in the future, meaning an attack or something that your enemy or the people you were looking at were going to do. It's actually more predictive to look at the metadata than to actually look inside of a phone call or to listen or to read an inside of an email. If you look at the metadata, just like you're describing, that's actually more predictive of actions in the future, correct?
Yes, and because it really gives you a view of the whole scope of your relationships. For example, if you're looking at an email, you're looking at just one transaction between two individuals or a phone call between two individuals. You're looking at that one event. But if you look at the metadata, you see the entire scope of your relationships in your entire life. So it gives you a much broader and more comprehensive view of the interactions of your between people in your life.
And
Whereas any individual email or phone call will give you just a peek at that.
now, am I overstating it when I say that you were the first one to figure this out, that metadata gave you, and how to decipher metadata? Are you the person who invented it, or am I overstating that?
Well, no, it was used in World War One and also World War Two,
Okay.
but nobody took it to the degree I think that I did because I did it in a more. I was a mathematician, okay, so by training, and so I took it in terms of the mathematics and how systems like that could be put together, not just what you see, but also what you don't see. So I was doing the entire system of data, not just little parts that I could see or that I was given to work. I looked at everything, and it was all based on metadata relationships and how you can piece them back together and see not only how they how they are interacting using the metadata, but also how the metadata is structured and how they distribute it. That means you can get into things like things that they have in their safe that they don't even know they have until they open it. So you can get to being able to see into phones that they bury in the jungles or something like that to be used at a future date. You can see all this in advance and be prepared for it without even having seen any of it.
I mean, that's all very so. Yeah, the fact that you were a mathematician, you were able to figure stuff
Yeah.
like this out. It's mind blowing to regular people like me how your mind works, and it really is. So, also now again, am I overstating this that you were able to predict the Tet Offensive?
Well, not me personally, but others, yeah. And it was again the basic principles of analysis that goes back to World War One. Those kinds of techniques and things evidence in how militaries act, how they prepare for assaults, and how they develop in time over time to see movements that take off positions for the offensive, and then the spread of the deployments and so on to see what wide range of attack it would be. And in the case of the Tet Offensive, it was clear that it was going to be an offensive that would go from the DMZ down to the Delta, which is the whole of South Vietnam.
So, okay, so now you invented a way to track people. First of all, in the documentary, it talked about how you had your team connect every phone to every other phone in the world, which sounded like an impossible task to do. Did they pull it off?
Yes, I mean it was pretty. I mean, for us it was pretty straightforward. Okay, just think of it as one at a time. Every individual has a social network. So if I take your phone, how many other contacts are there with that phone? That helps to define your social network. It might not be the whole thing, but you may use your cell phones and also have a separate, what looks separate but can be merged as a parallel social network. Or you may use email or tend to use the email or short messaging between others. And you can see all those kinds of relationships too and define, the kinds of transactions that you have with different people. As
And
long as you can predict or find consistencies, you can begin to look at things for patterns and try to deduce what that means. Yeah.
I mean, yes, and the way that you're able to make sense of all that, I know it makes sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to me. So I'm just blown away how you do it, how your mind works. I'm really in awe. Now you invented Thin Thread, correct? That's what it was called, Thin Thread.
Yes, there were basically two parts to Thin Thread. The first part was done by my partner Ed Loomis. That was the acquisition of data. As it's passed down the internet, it gets packetized and it's sent out in packets. Like if you have an email, your email may be broken up into 10 or 20 packets. Then these packets would be passed around the internet and then reassembled at the other end. And each of them would have the signatures that would, because these are machines running this. So, the machines have to be told exactly what to do. Otherwise, the data won't get where it's supposed to go. So all of the packets, each of them has the identifying numbers for the packet, the number of packets, the designation of the packet series, and the identifiers of everything that the originator and the ultimate recipient. So all that information is there, and then that allows you to reconstruct it at the other end.
Okay, so this is what now we're going to get into the Russian investigation and the hacking
Okay.
or the supposed hacking of the 2016, because what you said, what I thought I heard Edward Snowden also say, was that if it was the Russians who hacked into the DNC server and John Podesta's server, that the NSA would have that data available to them, that they would already know about the packets and they could release that information. Yep. And since they're not doing that, it makes Edward Snowden think that they don't have that information. Now, is that correct how I presented that, and is it true?
Yes, that's basically the reason I opposed it from the beginning in August of 2016 when they first started saying it, because the intelligence community it's not a question of CIA or FBI doing it. It's really NSA's job, and NSA has all the capacity to do that. They've got over 100 taps inside the United States on the fiber network where they're collecting and storing all that data going across the fiber network. so that if any packets were passed from the DNC through anywhere in the United States, they would be able to follow those packets. And also, if they went across, see, there's very choke points. The surface where the transoceanic cable surface is where all the foreign communications are going into the country and out of the country. So, and they're tapped too. So they've got all that. So that means that any packets that are going from the United States to Europe, they've got copies of. Okay.
Yeah.
So all they have to do is just look for the DNC IP address and of their server, and they will have all the packets that went across the network to Europe if they did. And since they never said that they did that or that existed, it told me right away they had no evidence of that.
Okay, so why, if you're okay, why does your opinion, do you think, being so roundly dismissed by the establishment media? Because if people, I was unaware of who you were until I saw the documentary on you, and I was unaware of how we even collect data. I was unaware of all that stuff until I saw that, and then you invented this thing called Thin Thread, which is a way to collect metadata, correct, and to analyze it, and it was very inexpensive, and it worked, right? So then your program got thrown out because they had another program called Trailblazer that was developed by some defense contractor, which made that defense contractor millions of dollars. And so they used
Actually, billions.
what's that?
Actually, billions.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. Billions. Well, now I can see why people would want to lie and smear you, because when it billions of dollars, that's worth it. So what happened was they had an inferior product called Trailblazer that they wanted the NSA to use to track metadata, and it didn't keep people's identities secret, which is Thin Thread, which is the one you invented, actually was better, less expensive, and kept everybody's identities private, correct?
Yeah, there were three. Actually, they took the software that we developed because, see, the Trailblazer program actually produced nothing. It was a total failure by 2005, and it had wasted over $4 billion. And then it was continued as a funding mechanism for some time, for about another 3 or 4 billion. And the idea was that it was intended to do all the things that we had already achieved with Thin Thread, and very little else, by the way. And so when it came time to doing the real spying on the U.S. citizens, everybody, as well as everybody in the world, what they really were doing was transiting from looking at groups of people who were doing criminal activities or militaries or things like that. In other words, multiple numbers of people together making an organization. They moved from that to looking at every individual in the world. And so that meant, you had so much more data coming in, and the only thing that could handle that was the software we did for Thin Thread. So what they did, they had to remove the filtering process up front that we used in terms of the metadata to sort and select only relevant data. They removed all that filtering, and so that everything came in. So we could see everything. That meant they could take everything in, and that's what they did. And then secondly, they removed all the encryption that protected the identities of people that were taken in, and weren't known to be a part of the criminal activity or terrorist activity, or whichever. And so that protected their identity until we could show probable cause and get a warrant and then go after them. And the final thing they removed from our software was an auditing routine. What it meant was we could see who came into our network and looked at any of the data we had, what they did with it, and how long they stayed, and what kind of manipulations they did with it. So that meant that all the managers in NSA and anybody coming in from outside NSA, like FBI and CIA coming into the NSA databases, or GCHQ or any of the other Five Eyes coming into the NSA databases, we would know who they were, when they came in, what they were doing, and how long they stuck around. And the point is, Edward Snowden couldn't have done what he did if we had our program running, because we'd see him do it right as he did it. That was the problem. It also came down to the management of NSA. That means that they came to us and said, well, if you do that, that means you'll be able to see all the money I move around in the database, and all the return on investment, all the programs we're investing in, and whether or not we should cancel or not, and And Congress can see all that, right? And we said, sure. And they said, you are never going to do this, so this program has to go away too. So in other words, they wanted a network where they could go in and do anything they wanted to, and nobody can come back and check and see what they did, so they couldn't be held accountable. That's really what's going on. It's the corruption that's involved. So, and they wanted to hide it from Congress.
And so what did you blow the whistle on exactly?
There were two approaches we took. The one was the first thing, of course, was the spying on U.S. citizens, the direct violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, also the first, by the way, just right up front. And I took that basically to the House staff of the House Intelligence Committee. It was their job under the FISA law, and after the Church Committee investigation, they were chartered to monitor the intelligence agencies to make sure they didn't spy on U.S. citizens. Well, here was NSA starting to spy on every U.S. citizen they could possibly get, which I estimated it'd be at least 280 million of us. So, and they have data on us, not just single items, but thousands of them. So I took that issue to the committee because that was their job, that was their charter. They were supposed to monitor that and make sure that didn't happen. I also attempted with Diane Rourke and Kirk Wiebe and some others to go to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court because it's their job also. And eventually, Kirk Wiebe and I also went to the Department of Justice Inspector General because that's his job also. Every one of those failed. Okay, they all were part of it. They all were covering up each other because they all knew they were in it together. The fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption at NSA, we reported to the Department of Defense Inspector General because that's their job, and they would circulate every week, every monthly circular that the NSA passed around. The last page would have a little statement that says, "Report fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption to the Department of Defense Inspector General. Here's the number." So. That was also part of the regulations for employment with the U.S. government. You're required to report that. So we reported that in that channel, and then took the criminal violations of the Constitution. We took to the House Intelligence Committee and the courts, and also the Department of Justice.
And so, did you know when you were doing this that you were being a whistleblower? I mean, did you know that? I mean, you must have known that what you were doing was going to put you in peril, put it that way.
Well, you see, I took an oath that I took pretty seriously because it was the oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And, if you're in the military, you take that. If you're in the civilian service, you take that. And if you're the President of the United States, you have the additional, not just preserve and protect, but also no, it's not protect and defend. It's also preserve. So he has the responsibility to preserve the Constitution. I felt that they were all reacting to fear and basically money and corruption. And I thought I wasn't prepared to do that because I knew they were giving away the security, and I knew people were not going to have security because of that. But they were claiming you had to give up privacy to get security. Well, that was a lie from the beginning, and they knew it. Okay, so I had to say things about that and go after that, and it was my responsibility since I had the knowledge to do it. How many people did, and not many were in the position I was to be able to retire and get out of there and do that. So that's what I had to do.
So that right now. We're still living in a surveillance state where we don't have privacy. Is that where we're living under?
Yes, I think Goethe had a good quote that kind of captured our state. It said, "No one," he said, "no one is more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they're free." And
Wow.
That's us.
And that is us. I try to remind people that we don't even have habeas corpus anymore in the United States, right? Which was kind of the linchpin of democracy, and it was in the Magna Carta. So I don't know, but George Bush, Barack Obama, Democrats, and Republicans all got together to repeal habeas corpus, meaning they've basically repealed the friggin' Magna Carta, and now we're operating on a liberty view from around the 1100s.
Yeah, and it's basically contained in the NDA, National Defense Authorization Act, Section 1021.
1021. Mm-hmm.
It says, it basically reads like Special Order 48 issued by the Nazis after 1933 Reichstag fire. They used that to effectively get rid of all of their opposition and anybody else they didn't like.
So, oh wow, I didn't make that connection. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's on the web. You can Google Special Order 48, Nazi Special Order 48, and you'll get it.
So
it's
now,
just like Section 1021.
That's amazing. I'm going to do that. And so now all the government has to do is say you're a terrorist, and you no longer. And there's all kinds of terrorism. For instance, the people up at Standing Rock, they declared them environmental terrorists, right? And so even the people with Occupy Wall Street, they can consider them terrorists, and then you don't get any rights. They can put you in jail without charging you with the crime for the rest of your life. That's what Section 1021 of the NDAA says, correct?
And no due process at all, right?
No, right, no due process. Okay, so that's pretty scary. Now, what was the pushback from the government for you telling the truth about what was going on?
First, of course, the FBI raided us and pointed guns at us. So that was in July of 2007. Then between 2007 and 2010, the Department of Justice, together with the FBI, attempted to frame us 3 separate times, and by fabricating evidence to charge us with supposedly conspiracy to expose more classified information, which it's like a nebulous charge that they can make against anybody, and then you get tied up in the courts. Well, the first 2 times I gave them the counter evidence that I had exculpatory information, and I easily provided that to our lawyer, and those 2 charges went away pretty quickly. But the 3rd time, they called our lawyer, and this was in December of 2009, and said that they were going to indict us, and they, all of us, Tom Drake, Kirk Wiebe, Ed Loomis, myself, and Diane Rourke for a conspiracy charge, and they were manufacturing this too. So at that point, I had been collecting all kinds of information on what they were actually doing, and also keeping back, since I was backing up everything, I also had all the data backed up and got it back from other people. So when they took it from us, we actually got it back fairly quickly. So we had all the exculpatory data that they didn't think we had. Okay, so they thought they would make up a charge and make it stick, I guess, at least cause us a lot of problems. But I had all that exculpatory data. I also had counter evidence to their charges too. And so when they told our lawyer that, I decided I was going to put it to the Department of Justice. So I called up Tom Drake because I knew his phone was tapped, by the FBI, and so I'm going to pull their chain. Okay, so I said, Tom, our lawyer called us and said they're going to indict us on this charge, all of us. And I said, I've been collecting all this data that's evidence of malicious prosecution on the part of the Department of Justice, which is a felony, and so and also fabrication of evidence, falsification of evidence, and so on. And so I'm going to charge them with us when they take us to court. And here it is, just so you have it. And so I read it across the phone to him, and then I hung up after that. And Tom didn't say anything. Then 1 month later, Kirk Wiebe and I get unsolicited letters of immunity from the Department of Justice. I know our lawyer didn't even understand what happened because I never told him, But that's what I did. I basically threatened the Department of Justice, and they went away.
Wow. And so that's got to not make you feel good that you spend your whole life serving your country, and then the most powerful agencies inside your own government come after you nefariously and dishonestly to try to ruin you?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm going after them in court. I've got 3 separate lawsuits in the federal courts that I'm supporting to come back at NSA and the FBI and the DOJ for unconstitutional activity. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, this is my country, not theirs. They're not going to take my Constitution away. That's the fundamental rights of this country and everybody in it. And that's the founding principles of our nation. I'm not going to let them get away with that.
The next live Jimmy Dore show is December 4th. That's a Monday night, December 4th in Burbank, California at the Flappers Comedy Club. Link for tickets right there. See you December 4th.